The boy was small for his age, the kind of child people often looked past without meaning to. He blended into the background wherever he went. In classrooms, he sat near the back. At gatherings, he stayed close to the wall. When adults talked, they rarely noticed him listening. He did not interrupt, did not demand attention, and never tried to show off. Most people assumed he was just another quiet child with nothing unusual about him. He came from a simple family. There was no history of music, no famous relatives, no big dreams spoken out loud at the dinner table. Life was practical. Wake up early, go to school, help at home, sleep, and repeat. Money was tight, but love was steady. His parents worked hard and believed that education and good behavior were the safest paths in life. Music, if it came up at all, was seen as a hobby, not something serious. The first time he noticed the piano, it wasn't in a fancy hall or a music school. It was old, slightly out of tune, and placed in the corner of a public space where few people paid attention to it. Some keys were scratched, others made dull sounds. Most people walked past it without a second glance. To them, it was just furniture. To the boy, it felt different, though he could not explain why. He didn't touch it at first. He only looked at it from a distance. Something about the black and white keys pulled him in. He watched other people sit down and press random notes, laugh, then walk away. He noticed how the sound filled the room, even when no one seemed to care. He noticed how a single note could change the mood, even if only for a moment. At home, there was no piano. There were no lessons, no practice books, no teacher guiding his hands. Still, music stayed in his head. He tapped rhythms on the table. He listened closely whenever songs played on the radio. He remembered sounds easily, as if his mind stored them without effort. No one noticed this either. To others, it was just a child being a child. At school, teachers described him as well-behaved but unremarkable. He did his work quietly and rarely raised his hand. When group activities happened, he followed instead of leading. His report cards were fine, nothing special. No one wrote words like gifted or exceptional next to his name. No one thought to look deeper. One day, during a school event, the same old piano was rolled into the hall. It was meant for decoration more than performance. The event was busy and loud. Parents talked among themselves. Students ran around. The piano sat there, ignored again. The boy noticed it immediately. He felt nervous just looking at it. His heart beat faster, though he didn't know why. He had never played a piano before. He didn't even know the names of the notes. But something inside him felt familiar, like meeting a friend he had only seen in dreams. He slowly walked closer, afraid someone might stop him. His hands felt cold. When he finally sat down on the bench, his feet barely touched the floor. A few people glanced his way, then looked away. Some smiled politely, the way adults do when they expect a child to make noise for a few seconds and then leave. He pressed one key. The sound surprised him, not because it was loud, but because it felt right. He pressed another, then another. There was no plan, no song he meant to play. His fingers moved carefully, almost testing the piano, as if asking permission. People nearby barely noticed. A few thought, he'll stop soon. Others assumed he was just messing around. No one expected anything worth listening to. In their minds, talent looked older, taller, more confident. Talent came with training, not with a small boy in worn shoes. What they didn't see was what was happening inside him. Each sound connected to something he had already heard before. His fingers started finding patterns on their own. Slowly, the random notes began to make sense. His back straightened. His hands relaxed. His fear faded. The room was still loud, but the boy felt like he was alone with the piano. He wasn't thinking about the people watching or not watching. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was only following what felt natural. The music wasn't perfect, but it was honest. A few seconds turned into a minute. Someone nearby paused their conversation. Another person looked over again, this time with curiosity. The boy didn't notice. He was too focused, too deep in the sounds flowing from his hands. Still, most people underestimated him. They thought any child could press keys and make noise. They didn't hear the small details, the emotion hiding between simple notes. They didn't realize that something rare was starting to show itself. Eventually, teacher gently approached and asked him to stop. The event needed to continue. The boy nodded and stood up without complaint. He walked away quietly, just as he had come. No applause followed him. No one stopped to ask where he learned to play. To the crowd, the moment had already passed. But for the boy, nothing was the same after that. That brief touch with the piano stayed with him. At night, he imagined the keys under his fingers. He remembered the feeling of the bench, the sound of each note, the way his heart felt calm while playing. He didn't have the words for it, but he knew he had found something important. He began searching for chances to be near a piano again. Sometimes it meant standing quietly in the corner of a room. Sometimes it meant waiting until everyone else had left. He never asked for permission because he didn't want to bother anyone. Deep down, he feared being told no. When he did get a chance to play, it was never for long. People still didn't take him seriously. They saw a child wasting time. Some smiled kindly. Others ignored him completely. No one thought they were witnessing the beginning of something special. He didn't mind. He wasn't playing for them. Each time he touched the keys, he learned something new. Not from books or lessons, but from listening. He listened to how one sound led to another. He listened to the silence between notes. His hands slowly grew more confident. His memory grew sharper. At home, his family noticed he was quieter than usual, often lost in thought. When asked what he was thinking about, he shrugged. He didn't know how to explain it. How could he describe a feeling that even adults around him couldn't see? Life continued as normal. School, chores, sleep. Nothing on the outside changed. But inside him, something was growing. A connection, a purpose, a voice that didn't need words. The world around him still underestimated him. They saw a little boy with no training, no confidence, no spotlight. They assumed greatness would come later, if at all. They had no idea they were already late, and this was only the beginning. As time passed, the boy's love for the piano grew stronger, but the world around him stayed the same. People still saw him as small, quiet, and ordinary. No one imagined that music lived so deeply inside him. Whenever he found a piano, even if it was old or broken, he felt pulled toward it. But getting access was never easy. At school, music class was rare and basic. Most days were focused on exams and rules. When the piano was mentioned, it was usually for special events or older students. The boy watched from the side as others were chosen. He didn't complain. He didn't raise his hand. He had already learned that attention was not meant for someone like him. One afternoon, he gathered courage and asked if he could try playing during practice time. The teacher looked surprised, then unsure. The teacher asked him if he had taken lessons before. When the boy quietly said no, the answer came quickly. Maybe later, the teacher said, already looking past him. It wasn't said in anger. It was said casually, which somehow hurt more. Later never came. Other students laughed sometimes when they saw him staring at the piano. Not cruel laughter, just playful teasing. "Do you even know how to play?" Someone asked once. He smiled weakly and said nothing. Explaining felt useless. How could he explain something no one wanted to believe? At home, he never asked for a piano. He knew it was too expensive. His parents worked hard just to manage daily needs. Asking for something so big felt selfish. So he kept everything inside. He practiced on imaginary keys, tapping softly on the table, on his knees, on the edge of his bed. Each tap meant something to him, even if it looked like nothing to others. Whenever music played on the radio or television, he stopped whatever he was doing. He listened closely, memorizing the sounds. He noticed patterns others ignored. Fast notes, slow notes, happy sounds, sad ones. His mind held on to them like stories without words. But the world still doubted him. At a community center nearby, there was a piano that older kids sometimes used. The boy would sit quietly and wait, hoping for a turn. When his chance finally came, someone would often say, "Let the older ones play first." Sometimes they told him he was too young. Sometimes they told him he might damage the instrument. He always stepped back without arguing. People didn't mean to be unkind. They just didn't expect anything from him. One day, during a small local program, the organizers were choosing performers. Singers were confident. Dancers practiced in groups. When the piano performance was announced, everyone assumed it would be one of the usual players. The boy stood in the corner, heart racing, knowing he could do it, yet knowing no one would choose him. He wasn't chosen. Instead, someone else took the seat. The performance was fine, but forgettable. The crowd clapped politely and moved on. The boy watched silently, feeling something heavy inside his chest. Not anger, not jealousy, just a quiet sadness that felt familiar. That night, he lay awake longer than usual. He wondered if he was wrong. Maybe everyone else was right. Maybe talent really did need lessons, money, and confidence. Maybe what he felt inside wasn't real. Maybe it was just a dream that would fade with time. But the next day, when he passed by the piano again, those thoughts disappeared. His hands itched to play. His heart beat faster. Whatever doubt lived in his mind could not silence what his body already knew. Still, obstacles kept coming. Sometimes when he played, adults stopped him quickly. "That's enough," they said gently. "You're just practicing, right?" The word just followed him everywhere. Just practicing. Just playing around. Just a kid. No one asked him what the music meant to him. No one asked how he learned. They assumed the answers before he could speak. Even when people listened for a few seconds, they rarely stayed long. Phones came out. Conversations continued. Someone once said he's good for his age, then walked away. The words were meant as praise, but they felt like a wall. Good for his age meant not good enough to be taken seriously. There were moments when he felt tired of being invisible. Moments when he wondered if staying quiet was a mistake. But every time he sat at a piano, something inside him calmed down. The world felt less confusing when his fingers moved across the keys. He started waking up earlier just to have quiet time alone. In those quiet moments, he imagined stages, lights, and audiences who actually listened. He didn't imagine fame or applause. He imagined being heard. One afternoon, an older student noticed him playing and shook their head. "You should stop wasting time," they said. "If you really wanted to learn, you'd take lessons." The boy nodded politely, but the words stayed with him. For a moment, they almost convinced him, almost because deep inside, he knew something others didn't. He knew that learning doesn't always start with permission. Sometimes it starts with feeling. Sometimes it starts with listening, failing, and trying again when no one is watching. The more he was underestimated, the stronger his quiet determination became. He stopped wishing people would notice him. He stopped hoping for approval. Instead, he focused on improving whenever he could, even if it was only for a few minutes at a time. His fingers became faster. His timing improved. His confidence grew, not outwardly, but inside. He still walked with his head down. He still spoke softly. But when he played, he felt tall. The piano became his safe place in a world that often ignored him. It didn't judge his age. It didn't ask about his background. It responded honestly to his touch. If he made a mistake, it showed him. If he played well, it rewarded him with sound. Slowly, without realizing it, he was preparing for something bigger. People around him continued their lives, unaware of what was building quietly in front of them. They underestimated him again and again, never thinking their assumptions would one day be proven wrong. The boy didn't rush. He didn't force anything. He simply kept going, because sometimes the strongest talent grows in silence, waiting for the right moment to be heard. The day that changed everything started like any other day. Nothing felt special when the boy woke up that morning. He got ready for school, ate a simple breakfast, and walked out with his usual quiet steps. No one around him knew that this day would slowly turn into the moment he had been preparing for without even realizing it. At school, there was talk about a special program planned for the afternoon. It wasn't a big competition or a famous event, just a small gathering where students could show different skills. Some would sing, some would speak, some would play instruments. Most people didn't take it very seriously. It was meant to be light and fun. The boy listened quietly as teachers discussed the schedule. When the piano was mentioned, his heart skipped a beat. A familiar feeling returned, the mix of excitement and fear he always felt around opportunities like this. Part of him wanted to step forward. Another part reminded him of all the times he had been turned away. He told himself not to expect anything. As the afternoon came closer, the hall slowly filled with students and a few adults. Chairs were arranged, and the piano was placed at the front. It was the same old piano, the one that had been ignored so many times before. The boy noticed its scratches and worn keys. To him, it still looked beautiful. Performances began one by one. Some were nervous. Some were confident. The audience clapped politely each time. The boy sat near the side, watching everything closely. He wasn't scheduled to perform. No one had written his name anywhere. He knew that. Then something unexpected happened. One of the planned piano performers didn't show up. People began whispering. The teacher looked around, unsure what to do next. There was an awkward pause. The audience waited. The silence felt heavy. The teacher asked if anyone else could play. A few students avoided eye contact. Some shrugged. The piano sat there, empty, waiting. The boy felt his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment he had imagined so many times, yet it felt unreal now that it was here. His hands felt warm. His legs felt weak. A voice inside him said, "This is it." Another voice said, "Don't embarrass yourself." For a few seconds he stayed seated. Then, slowly, he stood up. People turned to look at him, surprised. Some looked confused. Some smiled in a way that showed they didn't expect much. The teacher hesitated but nodded. "All right," they said, unsure. "Go ahead." As the boy walked toward the piano, the room felt suddenly very big. Every step echoed in his ears. He could feel eyes on his back. Whispers floated through the air. He ignored them as best as he could. When he sat down, the bench felt familiar, like an old friend. His feet barely touched the floor, just like before. He placed his hands over the keys and took a deep breath. The noise in the room faded, replaced by a quiet focus he knew well. For a moment, he did nothing. People waited, some impatiently. A few thought he might freeze and walk away. No one expected what came next. He pressed the first key. The sound was soft, but clear. Then came another, and another. Slowly, carefully, he began to play. Not fast, not loud, just steady. The notes flowed the way they always did when he was alone. At first, the audience didn't react. Some continued talking. Some checked their phones. It looked like just another child pressing keys. But then, something changed. The melody began to take shape. The notes connected, telling a quiet story. There was feeling in his playing, something that couldn't be taught from a book. A few people stopped talking. Someone in the back looked up. The boy didn't notice. He was no longer thinking about the room or the people. His fingers moved with confidence he didn't know he had. The piano responded to him, just like it always did. As the music grew stronger, more people turned their attention toward the stage. Conversations stopped. Phones were lowered. The room slowly fell silent. The boy played with emotion, not caring if he made small mistakes. He didn't aim for perfection. He aimed for honesty. Each note carried something he had held inside for a long time. Every time he was ignored, every time he was doubted, every quiet moment spent dreaming. The sound filled the hall. Faces in the audience began to change. Eyebrows lifted. Eyes widened. People leaned forward in their seats. This was no longer background noise. This was something worth listening to. The teacher stood frozen near the side, watching closely. They hadn't expected this. No one had. The boy moved into a stronger section of the piece. His hands moved faster now, more confident, more sure. The piano sounded alive. The same instrument people feared he would damage was now creating something beautiful. Time felt strange. For the boy, it felt like only seconds had passed. For the audience, it felt like they were being pulled into a moment they didn't want to end. When he reached the final notes, he slowed down. The music softened, almost like a goodbye. Then, With one last gentle touch, he finished. Silence filled the room. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, not empty. The boy's hands rested on his lap. His heart raced. For the first time, doubt crept back in. Was it enough? He wondered. Then someone clapped. One clap turned into many. Applause filled the hall, loud and sudden. People stood up without thinking. Some smiled widely. Others looked emotional. The boy blinked, unsure if this was really happening. He stood up slowly and looked at the audience. He didn't smile big or bow dramatically. He simply nodded, shy as always. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time, he felt seen. The teacher approached him, this time with a different expression. Not doubt, not hesitation. Respect. They asked him where he learned to play. The boy shrugged and said softly, "I just listen." People gathered around him, asking questions. Compliments came from all sides. Words like talented and amazing filled the air. The same people who once ignored him now wanted to know more. The boy listened quietly, overwhelmed but calm. He wasn't thinking about praise. He was thinking about the piano, about how it felt to finally let the music out without being stopped. That day ended like any other. Chairs were folded. People went home. The hall emptied. But something had changed, not just for the boy, but for everyone who had underestimated him. They realized they had made a mistake. And for the boy, this moment was not the end. It was the beginning of being heard. After the applause faded and people slowly returned to their seats, the boy stood near the piano, unsure of what to do next. His ears were still ringing not from the sound of the music, but from the sudden attention. He had never experienced anything like that before. Applause was something he had only heard for others, never for himself. People began whispering, but this time the whispers were different. They were not careless or dismissive. They were full of surprise. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled warmly. A few looked thoughtful, as if they were replaying the moment in their minds. Trying to understand how they had missed this before, the teacher who had earlier hesitated now walked closer, speaking more gently than before. They asked the boy if he could play again sometime, maybe during another event. The boy nodded quietly. He didn't say much. Words still felt hard for him, especially in moments like this, as the crowd slowly dispersed. Few adults stopped him and asked simple questions. How long had he been playing? Did he have lessons? Did he practice at home? Each time, his answer was short and honest. He didn't have lessons. He practiced whenever he could. He just listened and remembered. Some people looked confused by that answer. Others looked impressed. A few exchanged glances, as if realizing something important. They began to understand that what they had just seen wasn't luck or coincidence. It was something real. When the boy walked home later that day, everything felt slightly different. The streets looked the same. The noise of traffic and people hadn't changed. But inside him, there was a calm confidence he had never felt before. Not pride, not excitement, just a quiet sense of truth. He knew now that what he felt for music was real. At home, his family noticed something right away. He was quieter than usual, but not in the same way as before. There was a softness in his face, a calmness in his movements. When they asked about his day, he hesitated, then simply said he played the piano in front of people. That was all. They were surprised, but he didn't explain much more. He went to his room and sat on his bed, replaying the moment again and again. Not the applause, not the faces, but the feeling of playing freely, without being stopped or doubted. The next few days brought small changes. At school, people looked at him differently. Some smiled when he walked past. Some asked him questions. A few even apologized for not taking him seriously before, though they didn't say it directly. The teasing stopped. The laughter faded. In its place was curiosity. Teachers began to notice him more. They watched how he listened, how focused he was. One teacher arranged a proper time for him to practice on the piano, something that had never been offered before. It wasn't a big deal on paper, but for the boy it meant everything. Still, not everyone believed. Some people thought it was just a one-time thing. A lucky moment. They said things like, "Let's see if he can do it again," or "He'll probably lose interest." The boy heard these comments, but they didn't hurt him the way they used to. He had already proven something to himself. When he sat at the piano again, there was pressure this time. People were watching more closely. Expectations had changed. Before, no one expected anything. Now, they did. That made his hand shake for a moment. But once he started playing, the pressure faded. The music came naturally, just like before. He made mistakes, but he didn't panic. He corrected himself and kept going. The sound filled the room, steady and sincere. People listened quietly. There was no doubt now. This wasn't a child pressing random keys. This was someone who understood music deeply. Even without formal training, one evening after another small performance, an adult spoke to his family. They suggested finding a teacher or a mentor. Not in a forceful way, but as an opportunity. His parents listened carefully. They had always worried about practicality, but now they saw something they couldn't ignore. They saw how serious he was. How calm he became when playing. How focused and alive he looked. For the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine a future they hadn't considered before. The boy noticed this shift too. His parents asked more questions. They asked what kind of music he liked. They listened when he talked, even if he spoke quietly. They didn't promise anything big, or their support was clear. That support mattered more than applause. At the same time, the boy stayed the same in many ways. He didn't brag. He didn't change how he dressed or spoke. He still preferred quiet corners and empty rooms. Fame or attention didn't interest him. Music did. He continued practicing whenever he could. Sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late in the evening. Each time he played, he discovered something new. A different sound. A different emotion. The piano became not just an instrument, but a place where he felt understood. People who once underestimated him now spoke about him differently. Some shared his story with others. "You won't believe what this kid can do," they said. The same words that once limited him now helped open doors. But the boy didn't think about revenge or proving people wrong. He wasn't angry at those who doubted him. He understood something they didn't. Not everyone knows what to look for. He knew how easy it was to overlook quiet people. One day, he overheard someone say, "I never thought he had it in him." The boy smiled to himself. Not because he felt proud, but because he knew the truth. He had always had it in him. The world just hadn't been listening. The silence that followed his performances was no longer disbelief. It was respect. That silence meant people were thinking, feeling, reflecting. It meant the music had reached them, and that mattered more than loud praise. As weeks passed, opportunities slowly appeared. Small ones. Invitations to play at simple events. Chances to practice on better pianos. Nothing too big, nothing overwhelming. Just steady steps forward. The boy took each step carefully. He didn't rush. He didn't fear being underestimated anymore. He had learned something important. People's opinions could change. But his connection with music didn't depend on them. He remembered all the times he had been ignored. All the times he had been told to wait or move aside. Those memories didn't make him bitter. They made him patient. Because now, when he sat at the piano and the room went quiet, he understood something powerful. Silence can mean many things. Sometimes it means people don't care. But sometimes it means they are listening. And this time, they truly were. The boy's life did not suddenly turn into a dream after that moment. There were no flashing lights every day and no crowds waiting outside his door. What changed was quieter, but deeper. The world around him began to open small doors, and for the first time, he was allowed to walk through them. He continued going to school like before. He still carried his bag the same way and sat quietly in class. But something inside him had settled. He no longer questioned whether his love for music was real. That doubt was gone. In its place was a steady belief that did not need anyone else's approval. More people began to ask him to play. sometimes at small gatherings, sometimes during school events. Each time he felt a little nervous, but it was different now. The fear was no longer about being laughed at. It was about doing justice to the music he felt inside. He wanted to play honestly, the same way he always had. He learned something important during this time. Talent alone was not enough. He needed patience, discipline, and effort. So he practiced more carefully. When he made mistakes, he didn't get upset. He slowed down, listened again, and tried differently. He treated each mistake as a lesson, not a failure. A teacher eventually helped him find proper guidance. Not fancy or expensive, just someone who understood music and cared about helping a quiet child grow. The boy listened more than he spoke. He absorbed everything. He didn't rush to show off what he knew. He focused on improving. Learning music with guidance felt different. It gave names to things he already felt. It helped him understand why certain sounds moved him. Instead of limiting him, it gave him freedom. He realized that learning did not take away his natural connection. It strengthened it. At home, his family supported him in small but meaningful ways. They adjusted schedules. They encouraged him when he felt tired. They listened when he played, even if they didn't fully understand the music. Their presence gave him strength. There were still days when things felt hard. Days when practice felt slow. Days when he compared himself to others and felt small again. But now, he knew how to sit with those feelings instead of running from them. He reminded himself of how far he had come, not in applause, but in growth. As time passed, people stopped talking about him as the quiet kid who surprised everyone. They spoke about him as someone serious about music. That change mattered. It meant they no longer saw him as a moment, but as a journey. He never forgot how it felt to be underestimated. He remembered the looks, the doubts, the polite dismissals. Those memories stayed with him, not as pain, but as guidance. They reminded him to stay humble. They reminded him to listen before judging when younger children watched him play. He noticed their wide eyes the same way his must have looked once. He smiled at them gently. He didn't push them away or make them feel small. He knew how powerful encouragement could be, even without words. Music became his way of speaking to the world. When he felt happy, the notes danced. When he felt sad, the sound softened. When he felt confused, the music helped him breathe. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was part of how he understood himself. Opportunities continued to come, slowly and naturally. Some lead somewhere. Some didn't. He learned that not every chance needed to be taken. He learned to choose what felt right instead of what looked impressive. What mattered most was that he stayed true to why he started. He didn't play to prove anyone wrong anymore. He played because it felt like home. One evening, after a long day, he sat alone at a piano in a quiet room. No audience. No expectations. Just him and the keys. As he played, he thought about the little boy he used to be. The one who stood in corners. The one who waited silently. The one who was overlooked again and again. He realized something important. That boy never lacked talent. He lacked space, once given even a small space to grow. He bloomed. The world often underestimates quiet people. It looks for loud confidence and quick results. It forgets that some of the strongest voices take time to be heard. The boy was living proof of that. He didn't know where his journey would lead. He didn't need to know. He trusted the process now. He trusted himself, and somewhere along the way, the same world that once overlooked him learned a lesson. To don't never underestimate someone just because they are quiet. Sometimes, the softest voices carry the strongest music.